Now, I live in a society in Northern Ireland where we had intolerance, and still have, but violent intolerance for over 30 years. And we filled our graveyards with people. Allport in the 50s described a hierarchy of discrimination, which started with hate speech and ends with genocide. And we know empirically that where hate begins through speech and intolerance, it can result in death and murder, and in some situations in some countries around the world, right up to genocide. So addressing hate at its origins, addressing the issues when they arise is critical to trying to stop these things escalating. And how we as a group of people, a group of leaders, a group of employers or employees or co-workers, how we deal with that is crucially important. Now, what I also know is that most people in the UK don't really understand what I'm talking about. They understand the concept. They hear it on the news. They hear the word hate. And some people get a very bad reaction to it. Some people think that hate crime is about treating some people better in the justice system than others and about discriminating against people in their favour. It's not. Dealing with hate crime is about access to the justice system. It's about talking to the people who actually find the justice system least accessible and making it more accessible, or as accessible as it is for me, a 50-year-old overweight Irish white man who has no trouble accessing the justice system. But there are many people who do. So what we're trying to do in addressing hate crime and labeling hate crime is give people that voice. What we're also saying to the public and to offenders is that if you use these motivations against people, you will get a heavier sentence. And why do we say that? Well, we have another expression in policing. We say hate hurts more. And what do we mean by that? Well, I don't know how many crimes have been committed against the people in this room or those online. I'm sure we've all at some point in our lives had an experience of crime. And it's usually very upsetting, usually very annoying, at the very least. You usually feel isolated, victimized, devalued. We know empirically that if you're a victim of a crime because of your race or your religion or your sexual orientation, or because you're transgender, or because you've got disability, that the impact upon you is far greater than it is if you weren't targeted for one of those reasons. So we know in policing that crimes against people because of who they are, personal crime, and this also translates across into sexual offences, not just in hate crime as well, but crimes against who you are have a bigger impact. What we also know is that the impact not just upon you, but also with a community who may identify with you. So if there are crimes against someone because of their race, such as, for example, the murders in Buffalo in the US, those crimes have a global resonance for people because they identify with the discriminatory act that led to the violence, that leads to the crime. They know that they could themselves be discriminated against or targeted for the same reason because of their difference, if you want to call it difference. So we know the ripple effect of hate crime is far greater than for most other offences. We know that if you are from the gay community, the LGBT plus community, and you are targeted because of who you are, and particularly if that comes up to the likes of kind of murder, that has a fear effect across a community that is different to, with respect and awfully, if you're murdered more randomly, but not for a personal characteristic. Now, these are difficult conversations, but they're true. And it doesn't mean that you get a better murder investigation. But what it does mean is we look more closely at the motivations of the offender. We also look more closely at the impact on the community. We also look for other resonant offences and reactions. So, for example, we know that if there's trouble in the Middle East, that both the Jewish community and the Muslim community in the United Kingdom suffer more hate crime immediately after those issues. There is an international reflection back into the UK of these events. And this has also been exacerbated and accelerated over the last 10 or 15 years, primarily through the use of the internet, where we can spread hate or spread information within seconds of it happening, including the use of fake news to try and spread discontent across communities and raise fear. So we know from our evidence base that there is this effect. So one of the challenges for yourselves, folks, whoever's watching this, is do you pick up any effect in your own workforce, for example, after the shootings in America? Do you pick up any effect in your workforce when there are these issues in your own community? How do your staff feel about it? How many people who are working for you have been a victim or are a victim of a hate crime and don't report it because they think there's no point? They think that people like me won't take it seriously, or they think it's something that you have to accept. How many people are suffering from multiple incidents where they are effectively changing the pattern of their lives to live differently because they are afraid to be in public because they look different or are different? How many people live like that? How many of them work for you? How many people who work for you who maybe are on sickness absence also have other issues around anxiety and agoraphobia because they're afraid to come out because of who they are? Now, I can't fix all of that as a police officer, but these all have a continuum for us that we know can, for some people, lead to very extreme issues for them. Low self-worth, agoraphobia, social isolation, all these types of things can affect people because they're afraid to go out. Now, the good news is, in the UK, we have one of the most liberal and accepting societies around a lot of these issues. But we don't think we're doing enough. We think there's more to go. And we think that, the issue of hate crime needs to be better ventilated, better understood. It shouldn't be something that seeks to divide communities. It should actually be an issue that we should all coalesce around. Quite often when I speak to people, I say, look, if you think about your own life, your own family, is there anybody in the room or online who can't identify with differential race, religion, disability, transgender, sexual orientation things within their families? Is there anybody who can say that? Is there anybody who can think about the people that you love in your family and think that it's okay that anybody would treat them badly because of any of those characteristics or any other characteristics, or commit a crime against them for that reason? And I think when you ask people that individually, most people will go, no. No, I don't believe that there's a reason that that's right. But then when we get into kind of the group issues around this, when we talk about issues like the far right, whose impact in the UK has increased exponentially over the last 5 years, we see people getting radicalized and by demonizing the other. And this can then lead to acts of discrimination, lead to acts of violence, lead to criminality. So there's a role for us in leadership and allyship in challenging that, both within our families, in our group circles, and also in our workplaces. So when you think about your discrimination rules within your workplace, your diversity targets, your outlawing of offensive behaviour, I'd also just ask you to start thinking about, not that you need to start reporting everybody to the police for criminality, but is there something more going on for some of the people you work with? And what more support can we give them? Do you know what a hate crime is? Do they know what it is? Do they know how to access support? Do they know how to access the police services in their local community? Do they know how to access victim support? Do they know how to access the groups, many groups around the UK who are there to support people, such as Gallup, Telmama, CST, support people with these issues? And so that's my kind of challenge to you today. Can you think into that space? The police service is here to serve you. My job is to serve and protect. It's not something I say lightly. It's something you should test people like me on every day, because we are public servants. We've sworn an oath of the office to do this. So there should be no sense that the police won't take me seriously, or that this isn't important. This is important. It's not the most common crime, but it's one of the most impactful crimes. It's very personal and very, 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 very damaging to individuals. It's hugely damaging to communities and can create strife and difficulty for us that ripples into all parts of our lives. So in this very sort of short little input today, without my slides, and I've probably been extemporizing quite a bit here, I just ask you to think about, does any of this make sense to you? And what the next question would be. What the next question would be. How can I take this little bit of input today from this chap I've never heard from before, who drinks oat milk or not with his coffee, and think about the people who I work with, live with, I'm in community with, who may be vulnerable to this or disproportionately suffering. Now, I've talked quite a bit about race and religion, but I just want to leave you with a very specific thought about disability. Disability is the most underreported hate crime in the UK by many, many thousands of crimes every year. Disability is hard in many respects to identify because it's quite a range of conditions that can affect people, some seen, many unseen. And we're all very aware of the mental health issues that affect most of us at various points in our lives. But people who are victimized as a result of their disability are highly unlikely to seek help, highly unlikely to report it to the police, highly unlikely to tell anybody, and quite often very likely to suffer in silence. Now, the reasons for that are manifold, but it isn't about vulnerability. It's not about them being more vulnerable than you or I. It's about people targeting them disproportionately because they think they can get away with it. And about whether or not they have the access points to get support and help. And I would ask you just in closing just to think about particularly that area, not just visible difference that it's easy to focus upon, but those people who may be really suffering today, who you maybe will have a reach into, who with a little bit of support, you could help change their lives. And maybe in the worst situations, and we have seen this in the UK, save their lives. Thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry it was a little bit random there, but I'm very happy to take any questions if you have any. Thank you. Nope. I take it there are no questions there? Well, that's good. Oh, sorry.
What sort of, is there any kind of central support, aside from kind of reporting to police around the hate crimes, if we were referring our employees, is there somebody to go?
Yes, so I mean, there's a number of groups. So for example, so we have an online portal for people to report online, and then obviously then you can report to your local police service. Your local police service have local hate crime officers. So each local service should have a bespoke response to this. There are then a number of support groups that span across the monitored strands who are there to support people who are victims of hate crime. So I mentioned Tell Mama, who are key for dealing with anti-Muslim hate crime, the Community Security Trust for anti-Semitic crime. We have a lot of connections then and third-party groups for disability and other groups as well. So there are lots of resources that we can give you. They're all available on our website, which is called www.truevision.com. All available on our website, but there are a lot of people on the field, but their voice isn't that loud because people don't think that this is something that they need to engage with. But there are a lot of people in the field who can help, and a lot of people who will take people seriously. We have a number of third-party reporting centres as well across the UK. You can report to these groups who can report to the police on your behalf, so you don't have to do it yourself. Which is a very effective way of accessing the justice system as well. The CPS have prosecutors trained specifically to deal with these offences, particularly in the area of disability. They've done a lot of effort there to try and improve the quality of their prosecutions alongside the police. So we have a lot of access points, a lot of resources, and we can provide you with the details how to get that. Hello, yeah.
I'm just wondering what you can do in a situation where the victim is reluctant to report.
Yeah. So it's good. It's a really good question about what you can practically do. So not everybody needs a criminal justice outcome to every crime. We see this in a whole lot of areas of police work. And sometimes people will be victimised on a number of occasions before they come forward. So I think the first process with any victim of a crime is to support them, take them seriously, recognise what's happened to them, and offer them the access points to do something about it if they wish. That alone can be the difference to someone suffering in silence and someone starting to take the steps to help themselves. But as a non-victim, if you want to call it that way, and we could all be victimised, but if you're not the victim, I think there's a real power in coming alongside people and recognising what's happened to them. Certainly if it's in your workplace, taking really strident action to address it, with or without the police. Offering them support and guidance. If it happens in the public arena, would you go to the point where you'd call the police yourself and report it, let the police come along and deal with it? We have had other citizens who at times will film these things happening, not get involved, but will film it and then provide the evidence to us. We don't want you to get involved in confrontations with people. We don't want you to do that. That's our job. It's our job to deal with those things. But I think that, to come back, I think the most basic thing you can do for people is recognise what's happened to them, support them, help them build some value back to who they are, and then help them try to decide if they want to do something about it. The justice system doesn't always give you a justice outcome. And that's one of the frustrations of people with justice. But well managed, the justice system can at least help you return some value to what you think you might have lost in that interaction with somebody. And we know that that's a very powerful outcome for many people in many circumstances, that you don't feel that it is about you, you don't feel isolated, and actually recognise that it's the offender who's created the problem, it's the offender who has the issue, they've committed the crime, there's nothing to do with you, it's all their issue. And I think those types of steps, I think are very, very, very important. And, given that I have a captive audience, I'd say that not just for hate crime, but I'd also say that to those of you in your workplace around domestic violence and sexual abuse and other forms of criminality. But those crimes that are effectively very personal are the ones that are hard to report, they're hard to talk about, and the more that you can come alongside people and help them through that, the better. And there are specialist resources in all our police services around all of those areas of criminality and victimisation that we would encourage people to engage with. Hopefully that answers your question a little bit. Okay. Is there anybody else who wants to quiz the cops? You don't get these opportunities very often, actually, to throw questions in Northern Ireland, we call them the peelers. But does anybody else want to ask about this? Okay. Well, look, I'll just finish again with this. Look, for a lot of people, this is kind of like over here because you think it doesn't affect you. Let me tell you, this is affecting lots and lots of communities in various ways. It is not about interfering with your freedom of speech. It's not about telling you how to behave. It's about allowing everybody to have an equal chance and equal access to the justice system and to go about our lives in the United Kingdom unmolested. It's a very basic thing we're trying to do. That's all it's about. And it's not about stigmatizing communities one way or the other. It's just about our inalienable individual human right to go about our lives unmolested. And you all have a right to that. All of you. And people like me, it's my duty to try and help you do that. Okay, thank you. There you go.
just using these mics now.
Oh, okay.
This is for the live stream, so I'm just going to clip my mic. This is for the live stream.
Why do you like to wear neutral colours?
It just goes with everything. Easy, elegant, minimal. Contrast, skin tone, both. It really just depends on how I feel that day.
Sense of expression.
There's nothing neutral about it.
I have all walks of life that come and sit in my chair, and I love connecting with them. Clients share their opinion with me, and it's like, oh wow, I didn't even think about it from that perspective. That's what people's minds were at, but you just want to make sure that what you're talking about is legit. When there is a disagreement, that excites me. I like there to be some flavor. That's what I think.
From Belfast to Birmingham, from Cardiff to Kings Lynn, every corner of the country is served by our hard-working, talented team who make us the best at what we do. We're Blair the Fixer. We're Emma the Revenue Protector. We are Murray the Meet and Greet Man. We're the Transporters, the Postcode Precisionists and the Night Managers, the Mail Detectives and the Stamp Stoppers. We're collecting and connecting. We are guarding UK letterboxes. We are caring for our crew. No matter what we do, no matter where we are, we all play a vital role keeping the mail moving and delivering a great service for our customers. Early starts, through the night, whatever it takes to get the job done. We are the team that delivers Christmas, the team that keeps customers and communities connected, the team that serves over 30 million addresses across the UK. We're all part of it. We are Royal Mail.
afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. I'm very excited to be here, as I'm sure we both are. My name is Sian Gabidon. I am winner of BBC's The Apprentice, or former winner of BBC's The Apprentice, CEO and founder of Jean-Marie Fashion loungewear, global loungewear brand. And I'm very excited to be here today to introduce you to Silke Moonster, who is the Chief Development Officer at Philip Morris International. Now, Silke, thank you for being here. I know you have been doing some very in-depth studies and research into everything, including diversity and inclusion. So tell me a little bit about the research that you've been working on for the past year it's been.
Yeah, it was a 1 year long research project.
Wow.
Thanks a lot, Sean, for having me here today and being with me on stage here. We started last year in March 2021. We announced that we're going to go for a 1 year long research project where actually IMD Business School in Lausanne, they were running an independent research on called Inclusive Future. And the topic was really about what inclusion, has inclusion to be defined today and how it is measured, and a recommendation on how it should be measured going forward, as well as the implications of latest events. And at that time it was more around Me Too, Black Lives Matter, coronavirus as well. What kind of impact these events had on how we define inclusion. We finished this study in March this year, and we published the report meanwhile.
Yes, and that's a public report, right?
It's a public report available for everybody on our website.
So Philip Morris partnered with the International Institute of Management Development on this project. So what do you think initially actually drove them to do that?
I think we were the ones driving them. We were looking for a partner who would be able to run the research and run a state-of-the-art research. And I think, of course, what is helpful is that we are geographically close. IMD Business School in Lausanne and PMI headquarters is in Lausanne as well. And so that we had a lot of connections. And we were actually the ones. I think one of the issues which we figured out relatively early is that we have many different ways of measuring diversity. So we are measuring diversity, although still predominantly gender diversity in all companies. But given the focus we have on inclusion and knowing how important inclusion is in order to make diversity also sustainable, to keep diverse talents in your workforce, the question was, how can we measure inclusion? And when we were looking ourselves, we didn't find how do I say, a gold standard for measuring this. Different companies were doing it in different ways, and we tried ourselves different methodologies, and we figured out that especially measuring it in different cultures. So we had one methodology, we measured in one country and it worked well and we got good insights, and then we measured in the other country and we saw that people were actually scared of giving honest answers. So it's like, having something which works across geographies and across the world proved to be very difficult, and that's why we felt like we were really struggling, and we felt we needed professional help from a research team at IMD to help us define how we should measure inclusion going forward.
Yeah, so they were the main goals, really, to be able to find out how to measure it. So the study is broken into three parts, right? First, second, and third. The first being kind of all about the definition of inclusion. Yeah. So kind of give us some insight into part one and what your findings were in that.
Yeah. So part one was about defining what inclusion means today, and also looking already at what gets done in terms of measurement. And I really liked, so the way the research was describing what inclusion today means is you have, on the one hand, you have very personal attributes or dimensions of inclusion. And they are belongingness, uniqueness, authenticity. And then seemingly contradictory on the other side, you have the more organizational elements of inclusion. and they are participation and fairness. And so the contradiction is kind of, we want people to bring their authentic self to work. We want to see them as unique individuals, but at the same time, we want them to work effectively in teams and be collaborative.
Yeah.
And there, the research clearly said that the linchpin between those more individual and the more organizational elements of inclusion is psychological safety. And psychological safety plays a big role in order to make sure that you can get all of these unique, authentic individuals and still have effective teams.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really, I think, very important for us. And that's also one of the reasons why this year we focus a lot on psychological safety as a base.
So what, to break that down, what is psychological safety, I guess in like a layman's term for anyone who might not know what it is?
Psychological safety is when people, when they come to work, they feel that they can speak up, that they can bring tough issues to the team, and that they don't fear retribution when they talk about tough issues, that they can talk about failures. Super important to see failures or mistakes more as part of a learning journey than something you will be punished for.
Yeah.
So that is what psychological safety means, and that allows people to be their true selves and still work effectively in teams.
Yeah. Right, that makes sense. So what would you say, I guess it's more of a personal question, but what would you say was one of the key findings, or maybe something that surprised you about the research that are one of the key things?
Yeah, it's like the not surprising. I think psychological safety was something very important for us. Mm-hmm. Also because we, in another piece of research which we did last year, we saw the importance psychological safety has for well-being of employees. And given well-being, and I'm sure we are not the only ones, seeing that our employees really struggle after 2 years of Corona and with recent events. And I think therefore having psychological safety is one of the bases we need in our company, and that's where we put a lot of focus on. So that was super important for us. The negative news, so to speak, from this research was actually that when inclusion has all of these different elements, which we talked about, uniqueness, authenticity, fairness, participation, it means, the research says, you need to measure all of them. And that means actually, if you want to measure all of them, you end up with a questionnaire of 80 questions, which no employee in this world is really willing to fill.
Yes.
And therefore, we had to rethink somehow how we go about measuring inclusion, because we were hoping for something rather simple with 7 questions, which you can plug into your employee survey.
Right. So when we're talking about the sort of different elements, are these the dimensions that we were discussing? So there's 8 dimensions, I believe, but can we talk about them in a little bit more detail as well?
Yeah, sure. It's like you have on the one hand, as I said, the more individual ones, belonging. And I think that is like, we all know, everybody who's working in D&I is like that. We always say that belonging is so important, that people feel they belong. And we actually have our internal slogan is feel the joy of belonging for D&I. And I think the thinking in many cases is that belonging is kind of the ultimate goal. That's what you want to achieve. And the research clarified this, that actually all of these elements like belonging and uniqueness are on the same, on a similar level. So it's like, it's not that one is more important than the other one. That was also super important. Fairness is something which we know is especially in big companies always a question, and fairness is very important for people. And we know also from all the surveys we've done that fairness is really something where you can almost always improve. Participation, I think, is clear, is like, everybody is able to participate and drive projects. And we have psychological safety, we discussed already, and diversity is like, not to forget. So actually, if you have no diversity, you probably also don't need inclusion. So you have conform groups, and inclusion might be less of an issue. But you need also diversity, you need diverse teams in order to talk about inclusion.
100%, 100%. So from, obviously, you carried out the study, it was a year long, and from that study and from the findings, I guess what were the key implementations from PMI? So, what have they changed based on what you have found?
Yeah, what we have changed, so as I said, one first step was that we focus on psychological safety going forward. We measured psychological safety this year in the first survey which we had, and I can only recommend there's a validated questionnaire out there developed by Professor Amy Edmondson, and we used this questionnaire in our Pulse survey. And then I think in part 3 of this research, actually one of the recommendations or what we worked together on was one question which is called Inclusion Net Promoter Score. And the question is, how likely are you to recommend PMI as an inclusive employer to friends and family members of an underrepresented group? And I'm not sure whether everybody is familiar with the Net Promoter Score. So this is a scale from 0 to 10, and everybody who says highly recommend 9 or 10 is called a promoter, and everybody who's 6 and below would be called a detractor. That's how you build Net Promoter Scores, and it's used a lot in consumer research and actually also in employee research as an employee Net Promoter Score. And it's a very sensitive way of measuring the sentiment around inclusion. And we have tested this question because that would help us with the dilemma of not having 80 questions in a questionnaire.
Yes. Yeah.
So we have tested, we have piloted this question with a representative set of employees. And that is something which we will implement going forward. And then we will put this INPS scores into people managers' objectives. So which means we give objectives to people managers, how they have to drive the inclusive culture of their teams, because that drives accountability across the company. So it's no longer only inclusion and diversity departments who drive this, but it's every people manager who clearly sees that it's on them to drive the overall inclusivity.
Okay, because I was going to actually ask, what do you do with those who, when they fill in the scores and it's a low score, for example, or they're kind of saying I'm not happy or I'm not happy with the inclusive and etc. How is there a plan for how you attack that and help that and improve how they're feeling?
Of course, it's like with regards to psychological safety, for example, where we've done the measurement already. Psychological safety is always something which is happening in teams. So, and therefore we are currently looking at which teams are very low in terms of psychological safety, and we have developed different tools in order to help those teams then to progress. So it's like you always have a look at who's not doing well and also who's doing well, and what can they tell the others about how they achieved this kind of culture. And the same will be true for the INPS once we have implemented it company-wide.
Which is exactly why the research is done, isn't it? To highlight the problems, highlight the issues, and then find a solution to fix them so overall everybody's happy.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about part 1. Let's talk a little bit more about part 2 as well. So what was part 2 entailing?
Part 2 was taking care of what the impact was, as I said, we've explained before, of those events like Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and Corona. And I think one element which is really important is what we saw again is with COVID-19, that this whole hybrid work which we had, it looks like super inclusive because everybody is kind of online in the same environment, because everybody was actually working from home. Now we get into hybrid, and that's where the challenges will be to make this really inclusive. And we all know there's a proximity bias. So actually people who are closer to you, people who come together to the office, might be, or we know they are more connected than those who will be more virtual. and that is specifically something which we have to take care of, and that was also discussed in the report. The other element which was discussed with regards to COVID-19 is that actually there are certain groups, we all know that there are underrepresented groups were actually more impacted by COVID-19. We know the impact it had on more impact on women, more unemployment, and for people who are more challenged with regards to their socioeconomic.
Yeah.
So I think, and that is true as well, and that was for if you think about Me Too, sexual harassment, we talked about before, and also with regards to racism. So it's like, you know, certain groups are always more impacted than others, and that's actually an element which we as companies have to look more for. Those social mobility is a topic for us going forward, definitely.
100%. I think definitely touching on the COVID side, you know, even just the idea that at that time when everybody was working from home, I guess initially everybody was kind of like, okay, I've got to do it, it is what it is, but it was very difficult for some people. You know, everybody works differently, everybody prefers something.
Absolutely.
You know, I very in the world, you know, can be touched on, but it's true that the COVID situation, I can imagine, was a very big part of that. Okay, so then let's go into part 3 as well. We may as well cover off all the parts. Part 3, let's talk about part 3.
Part 3 was the recommendation they have given, and I think actually the research very clearly says that while there are very good examples out there and companies measure inclusion in very different ways, but that actually we should measure inclusion holistically, and that means taking care of all the different dimensions of inclusion. Maybe starting with those dimensions where you feel you have more issues as a company, and it clearly recommended that you should do a combination of quantitative and qualitative methodologies, which means like when you have this, like we have our inclusion net promoter score, you need to do also focus groups or one-to-one discussions with employees in order to better understand, you know, what is driving this score and how can you actually help them. And it also made reference to the fact that surveys always have a certain kind of limitation, because you ask employees, and as I said, you know, depending on the culture and how psychologically safe people feel, you know, they are willing to tell you the truth, or they feel obliged to answer it in a politically correct way. So I think one way of looking at the sentiment of your employees is also to do an analysis of, we all have internal communication channels, and to analyze what people are posting there, and the sentiment of what they are posting there is also a way to is enhancing whatever you have in terms of quantitative data. And I think all of these tools together will give us a proper idea of how inclusive our future is. And of course, I think one of the elements in part 3 was also this inclusion net promoter score, which we already discussed.
Yeah. I mean, a year-long study, you know, it sounds fantastic. Where can we actually find that study if we did want to have a look?
You can find it on our PMI website, pmi.com, as far as I know.
pmi.com. Take a look, guys. Okay, so what is next? You know, you've done this study. What is coming up next?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the beauty is, like, now we have measured psychological safety, we are doing these interventions with teams, and then I'm looking forward to having the next measurement and seeing improvement for those teams which we have identified to be challenged. And then, of course, the implementation, global implementation of the inclusion net promoter score. And the beauty there is, for every training which we now do, we can use this question and do a before and after. Like, you know, how included did people feel before? Then we do a training or communication campaign, and then we measure afterwards again. And that will give us an idea of which of the tools we are using are actually impacting and moving the needle going forward. That is really super important, because we all have limited resources, and it's important to put it where we can achieve the most.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's fantastic what you're working on. I think everything that you've done over this past year will, it's all, as we said previous, the research is there to be implemented, to be used, and to technically just improve the workforce, to improve how people are feeling whilst they're at work. That would covered off most of the questions that I wanted to ask, but was there anything else that we want to just get in there just about the survey, or anything that we really think is key that people should know about it?
Yeah, I think, honestly, I think what I would love, or we would love actually, is if we find other like-minded companies who start using the INPS as well, because with all of these scores, it's always so. Let's say we have an inclusion net promoter score of 30. It's like, it's difficult to say, is 30 good enough, or can you actually achieve 50, or should we achieve 70? So having benchmarks. So if more people would be using this, and you
could get a gauge of, I guess, where you are.
Exactly, where, how are we doing compared to others, and how high can you get? I think that would be a wonderful idea, and exchanging this would be super going forward. So I think that's really something I would encourage people to do, and it's literally like 2 questions and not super difficult to implement.
So it's easy enough. So
easy,
can they do this if they go to the website?
Yeah, there's no.
So I think after this session, guys, if we can all just go to the website and do this, that would be a great help. Well, thank you so much, Silke, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for the work that you've been doing, because it sounds amazing. And thank you, and have a lovely rest of the day. And thank you, everybody, for listening today. Thank you all. It's really nice and sunny outside as well. I weren't sure if we were going to be outside to we're by a fireside, it's nice and sunny, but it's a nice day, and it's nice that you're all here. And enjoy the rest of your afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody.
Why do you like to wear neutral colours?
It just goes with everything. Easy, elegant, minimal. Contrast, skin tone, both. It really just depends on how I feel that day.
Sense of expression.
There's nothing neutral about it.
I have all walks of life that come and sit in my chair, and I love connecting with them. Clients share their opinion with me, and it's like, oh wow, I didn't even think about it from that perspective. You just want to make sure that what you're talking about is legit. When there is a disagreement, that excites me. I like there to be some flavor.
From Belfast to Birmingham, from Cardiff to King's Lynn, every corner of the country is served by our hard-working, talented team who make us the best at what we do. We're Blair the Fixer. We're Emma the Revenue Protector. We are Murray the Meet and Greet Man. We're the Transporters, the Postcode Precisionists and the Night Managers. The Mail Detectives and the Stamp Stoppers. We're collecting and connecting. We are guarding UK letterboxes. We are caring for our crew. No matter what we do, no matter where we are, we all play a vital role keeping the mail moving and delivering a great service for our customers. Early starts, through the night, whatever it takes to get the job done. We're the team that delivers Christmas, the team that keeps customers and communities connected, the team that serves over 30 million addresses across the UK. We're all part of it. We are Royal Mail.
back to the Dial Global Virtual Summit, Inclusive Leadership, Championing a Culture of Inclusion and Allyship. This panel, and I know some of you will have been listening to other ones, this one is called What Does Ageism Look Like, and Why is it critical to address ageism for true inclusion? I hope that's got you thinking already. So my name's Carol Easton, and I have the great privilege of being the Chief Executive at the Centre for Ageing Better. And I'm joined today by 3 other wonderful leaders. So I'd like to introduce to you Jane Storm, who is Chief People Officer at Saga. Hello, Jane. Hi. Helen Webb, who is Chief People and Services Officer at the Co-op. Is that right?
That's right.
You will correct me if I get it wrong, won't you? Yeah, great, okay. And Pauline Miller, who is Chief Equity Officer EMEA at Dentsu. Is that right?
That's correct.
Excellent. So if you don't know what these businesses are involved in, perhaps when you introduce yourselves, you could tell people the kind of focus of the organisation as well. That would be great. But to kick us off, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you think ageism is a problem? Now, I know there's a lot of people online. I would like to just see whether in the room people think it's a problem. Mind you, they're probably a bit coy to say no now. But anyway, why would I be raising it if I didn't think it was a problem? Okay, good point. Here in England, 30% of job seekers in their 50s and 60s who left sort of leading into and during the pandemic have reported that they're put off applying for jobs as they've experienced age discrimination in recruitment, 30%. AARP in the US, also an organisation working in advocacy and very many other ways with over 50s, report that 64% of workers have witnessed or experienced age discrimination. So really large figures. Right now, we also see that older people are dropping out of the labour market and they're not coming back. Is it because of ageism, either by omission or by commission? Is it a lack of training skills and development opportunities? Is it because they can't adapt their home lives, their caring lives, their health conditions in relation to the work offers that they're receiving? The Mackenzie Dellis review showed that age was number 9 out of 10 facets of diversity in terms of how it was monitored and addressed, so virtually at the bottom of the list. So what does ageism look like? Is it when a 55-year-old is told she's too qualified for an administrative role? Maybe. Is it when a candidate in his 50s could hear that the company is looking for a recent graduate and wants someone really energetic and innovative? Is it when an employee in her 60s is told, maybe don't go to that conference, take it easy this month? Ageism is a problem now too because you would have had to not heard the news this week because there are labour market shortages and there is no one else who's going to fill those gaps. Now, as soon as I talk about older people, people say to me, yeah, but what about the younger people? I absolutely accept ageism can impact on everyone, no matter what their age. But today we are going to focus on those over 50. We're going to hear from these great women about how they have proactively addressed ageism in their organisation, from programmes they've started, continuing to run, and how they've addressed bias in their organisations. So really exciting stuff. So Jane, then Helen, then Pauline, could you just each say for a minute or so something about yourself, about your organisation, whoops, I think I'm echoing, and why age is so important to you?
Thanks, Carol. Well, of course, at Saga, we provide products and services for people over 50 in the UK. Those products and services are around holidays, cruises, insurance, financial, media, and so age is very much heart of our business. We've undertaken a lot of insight, and we own a company called The Big Window. And in understanding age, we've really learned more about what's going on in this country and how older people want to be spoken to, how they want to be served, and how we use that insight to create product services that are really important to them. We've also championed an age in the workplace. And that's really important to us. And exactly as you said, Carol, some of the prejudice that people are experiencing. And facing into that prejudice in the country is really important, because that's important for us as a brand, and really starting to change that conversation. You know, we were talking earlier, quite often age is very much a joke. You know, people turn 50 and it's okay to give me a card that mimics my age, belittles who I am and what I do. And there are many aspects, as you said, in terms of diversity that it's just not okay anymore. But I think we still have that as being okay in this country, and hence it's so important and close to our heart what we do at Saga.
And has it made a difference to you personally as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things we go through, and we, you know, for all of us here, you know, online and in the room, it's very much going back, searching your stories and your experience. And I guarantee everyone could have a story about them or a family member, how they've been touched by ageism. But I just don't think we've had the conversation enough. It's something that people have been silenced on, or just had to smile because they've turned 50. And, you know, it's a joke that maybe a Saga envelope's come through the door. Why would that be a joke? And the reason that's a joke is nothing to do with the brand, it's because of the prejudice around age.
Really interesting. Oh, well, I look forward to hearing a bit more about that. Helen?
Yeah, so as Carol said, I work for the Co-op. For those of you who don't know, we are the biggest convenience food retailer in the UK. We're also the biggest funeral care provider in the UK. We're the biggest provider of probate services through our online legal business, and we also provide insurance. So we have a wide spectrum of businesses, and a third of our workforce is actually over 50. So it's not just a conversation of how do you attract people to your organisation. I think it's also a conversation about how you retain people within your organisation, and starting to look at where that turnover is coming from and at what age do people drop out, and some of the reasons. And I think we're going to talk about some of those reasons today. But you're right, Carol, there is a huge shortage of labour in the labour market at the moment. And I think we've all got a responsibility to think seriously on all 9 of the facets of you know, D&I and belonging, to think about how we make a difference and how we do things differently to show that everybody genuinely belongs within any organisation. And I think, you know, part of what this summit's about is about talking about those examples so that we can all learn from each other and do things differently. And I'm firmly in the over 50 camp, and but you almost feel you feel reticent to raise that, and it shouldn't feel like that.
Really interesting. You said you have 30%, which is the overall national workforce over 50 as well. So your organisation is clearly matching that. And I'm really interested in what you said too about the stigma attached to age that stops us speaking out and therefore can be perpetuated in the organisations that we work in. So maybe we'll come back to that a little bit later. Pauline, tell us.
Sure. So as mentioned, I'm Pauline Miller from Dentsu International. For those that haven't heard of Dentsu, unlike Saga and Co-op, Dentsu is an advertising agency. And with that comes great responsibility in the advertising world. We have the ability to influence what people think and the brands and the products that they engage with. And we take our role really seriously in that space. So how we can ensure that we're better represented in media, for example, when we think about the older population, just think about those adverts and how often you see, whether that's older men, older women, advertised more broadly across sectors, different sectors and different products, for example. So, you know, the role in terms of age is very important to us as an advertising agency. But in addition to that, I've been in diversity and inclusion now for nearly 20 years. So makes me, we always say that, oh, nearly 20 years, I feel a bit old. And I'm not quite yet 50, but I'm hurtling really fast towards it and really looking forward to it. But what it has done personally is had me think about what's the experience going to be like for me in the workplace as I get closer to 50. And so for me, it's been both a professional and a personal journey, recognising that it's changed, and there's been a lot of dialogue about age in the entire time that I've been in this field of work. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we've addressed all of the issues or that we've really thought about the workplace cultures. So I think that there's huge work to be done, huge areas for us to improve on, and really excited to be on a panel talking about age.
Oh, thank you, Pauline. And as you say, at Centre for Ageing Better, we've also been talking to the advertising industry because of the huge impact that you can have on how things are viewed and spoken about, and the language, and what is acceptable and what isn't. So I'm delighted to hear that you're taking it incredibly seriously. And I'm slightly embarrassed, actually, thinking the number of times I told women particularly to fudge how old they were on their CVs, because you kind of acknowledge that it's a problem. So kind of hide it rather than how can we challenge it and face it and value. So I'm kind of reflecting on some of the things I did in the past too, thinking, I'm not so sure that was such a good idea. Jane, can we start with you? Will you tell us about how you're addressing ageism? And it sounds kind of saga, it's interesting, isn't it? That you think you have it. Do you have it all sorted? Or tell us what you're doing to address ageism and the impact it's having.
Absolutely. I think with any of these things, you never arrive, and it's a constant journey. I think the big part for us is insight. And really using that insight, as I said earlier, in terms of design and products and services. We've got a panel of about 10,000 customers who talk to us regularly about age, and we've got a colleague panel too about age too. And just undertaking some very recent research, understanding cognitively what people need. So quite often, your point there about experience, this is the rich word, yeah. And as you get older, it's about really valuing that experience, that wisdom that colleagues can bring to the workplace, and how that can come through in serving customers, because of course too, we have lots of older customers to service. And so that's been a really big part. And therefore education, taking that insight into education. And we've worked hard to train all of our people, and we've got training ongoing, just to get the conversation about age. And what we've learned with that, first, it's what is the research. The wonderful thing here is that we haven't even peaked yet. You start to hit your peak, as you know, in your mid-50s. And that's the point when your experience and your cognitive ability sort of gets there in your mid-50s. And that continues, that only declines very slightly right up until you're 70. So this premise, and I've, heard people talk about things like, career runway and you wouldn't want to employ somebody over 50. Well, if you choose not to, you're missing the peak completely. So there's this whole opportunity for us to be keeping people in the workplace for many, many years, and it's very easy to keep people in the workplace well into their 50s, their 60s, and indeed you'll have examples in their 70s as I do.
80s.
Wonderful. So I think our first thing has been about this insight and really sharing this insight to help change this prejudice and mindset that people have. And then the second part for us has been in conversation. So the conversation we've just had here around what's gone on in my life, what about this card, what about saying how old I am and how I feel about that, and really starting to help people connect with age, very much to the heart and what's happening for them, because I think when you have it as a lived experience, it really starts to change your attitude and how you are and how you coach other people. And then the final part has been in our strategy. So of course, like every organisation will have our DEI strategy, but we have a pillar on age. And of course, working with you, Carol, and the team at the Centre for Ageing Better about thinking what are the pillars within that strategy that really makes a difference, both in the attraction and the retention of older colleagues.
And can you say a little bit about what impact you've seen as a result?
I think, one of the biggest ones for us was around flexibility, and we spoke about this earlier. So, for example, last year we launched something called Grandparents' Leave, which you would know about, which was offering any of our colleagues that become grandparents at Saga 5 days annual leave. And that was about recognising the role that grandparents play in our society, but also having policies and things there that suit the needs of older colleagues too. And as we launched that, one of my amazing surprises was how that was received by the media. So we had about 36 million hits to that, of course, in terms of touch points and social media. It was huge, which says something too. But also internally, what that said to colleagues about that they matter. And here we're talking about age, but the response we had, both from our older colleagues and their experience of using this policy, but also our younger colleagues. And our younger colleagues responded on our internal comms platform saying, I feel really proud. I'm really pleased we're doing that. And we might have thought it was the older colleagues would feel great. We then thought the parents would really like it as well because they could relate to it. But what really encouraged me was seeing our younger colleagues feel that it was such the right thing to do and gain some real confidence from that too.
And they will benefit from it as well, of course,
Absolutely.
won't they? I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? It's kind of we parcel people up, don't we? But actually the benefits go across society when you do something like that.
And again, we had some interesting media responses saying, well, can you afford to do that? And why would you do that? And it's to your point here, Helen, you can't afford not to sometimes. And for us, it was about the symbol. It was about the symbol of saying, as you get older, you're welcome. We're here for you. You matter. Rather than this view about age and older people becoming invisible.
Thank you. Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, just a couple of things I'd like to add. It's interesting what you talk about, people being at their peak between 55 and 70. There is something actually in our culture that doesn't value that. Because many of our European neighbours, it's highly valued. And for a period of time, I worked for an American company, and it was common parlance to say, actually, we've got a really knotty problem here. We need some grey hairs on it. Actually referring to people with experience. So what is it about our society? We're not having a proper conversation about age, and we're not having a conversation about how experience should be valued. So I think there's something we've all got to think about there. And we've started a conversation in our business about age a couple of years ago, and did some research with an organisation called Gen M, particularly around women in the workplace and why they were dropping out at about that 50 mark. And what we discovered was, actually, it brought us to another taboo subject, which is the menopause. And a quarter of women experiencing menopause problems and symptoms actually fall out of the workplace. So it's not just about saying, well, we'll welcome anyone of any age. It's about thinking through what support mechanisms actually need to be in place to support a workforce as they go through, the age and all that brings with it. So we recently launched a manager's guide to the menopause, and we discovered that 52% of managers here in the UK have no idea how to support a woman in those circumstances, or to even begin to have a conversation. Now, if you think about that's 52% of managers and the diverse way they will be made up, it probably means that the majority of us as a nation have no idea how to have that conversation. So what we've done is we've actually made our manager's guide to the menopause available to anybody who wants it. So it's on our website. Any organisation can take it. You can make it your own. You can copy it and steal with pride. But we do think it's one of those tools that are helpful in retaining women in the workforce, and also demonstrating that you are an employer where women who are probably over 45 heading to 50 are welcome, because they will be supported. And the more I think we can talk about that, the more people who are of my age that will be kept actually in the workforce.
And presumably key to that policy is a level of flexibility and adapting your demands of someone according to their health needs or what they can do. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's lots of advice in there about how to support people and where to direct people for education, because a lot of it is about education. Right. I mean, there are so many symptoms of the menopause, you can't even write a list, you can't even remember them. The list's so long. And certainly if you've got menopause brain at the moment, you won't remember them. So, it's about education and it's about discussion. And yes, it's about flexibility, but lots of us operate in organisations where flexibility, shift work, part-time work, I think we've created an environment where those things are okay, but it's a matter of communication and support, so that you make the right choices to make sure you're keeping the woman in the workplace.
Would you like to add?
I don't know if I can add much more to what you've said, but I do like the commentary around the menopause, particularly because I think it's not just something that happens older. And I guess what was going through my mind there was the preconceptions and the judgments that we make, and how easy it is for us. Oh, there we are. How easy it is for us to consider that it's only for those heading closer to 50. And actually, I'm perimenopausal for the last 5 or so years, but it's more obvious now. And actually, people wouldn't have thought that. They would have, a bit odd. They would have literally have said, oh no, that's too early for you, and the doctors will tell you that, and nurses will tell you that, and you'll know it's too early for you, and that can have an impact on me, 5, 6, 7 years ago, thinking I'm going crazy. So I think those are some really big pieces. But the piece about age is that it goes right the way across every aspect. Like, we're all going to experience getting older, and it's not just age as a single pillar, but it's thinking about the intersectionality of what happens for those who are older and perhaps of the LGBTQ plus community, and does that impact them in terms of their own acceptance, their own journey to coming out. For example, it can be harder for example, for older individuals who perhaps when they were younger it was illegal, and huge amounts of homophobia and crime. So just consider that there are really different touch points, and we've got to think about age in the broadest range, and how that can impact not just women but men. That's a really big thing as men get older, and whether they feel that they're accepted in the workforce as well. So you've got to really think about it in different lanes, and how they connect together.
Do you think people at the top of organisations take it seriously? Because there's a bit of a paradox, isn't there? It's sometimes, if you look at the top of organisations, the age profile is a little bit different from the rest of the organisation. Do you think that has an impact?
I mean, if you study the data and you have a look, it's almost expected that those at the top of the organisation are going to be plus 50-ish. And even for whether that's male or female, there is a real expectation that you'll see that. But if you think about those in more junior roles, if they're older, it's almost expected that they should be going because they don't bring anything more into the organisation. So a real disconnect between when the older workforce is valued, versus when perhaps in some organisations they're not as valued, because it's seen that there's almost surplus and we need to bring the younger talent in.
Interesting. You look like you wanted to comment on that, Jane.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder, I think that the real watch out for people at the top of organisations is, will be about what their outlook. So they may financially be better off. They may have some prejudice about, well, you can work until you're 55 or 60 and then I can afford to choose what I want to do. The vast majority of society life's not like that. And therefore it's really helping people in positions of leadership to really walk in the shoes of everyone, because there are many people that want to and can continue to work and contribute for many years, but there's also another group, as we know about poverty, that need to and they have to. Absolutely. And therefore the real opportunity for us is creating these cultures where everyone's welcome, but designing jobs in a way that people can continue to work and fulfil their ambitions as well as their needs.
Mm-hmm. I mean, certainly some of the work we've done at the Centre for Ageing Better shows that people have dropped out of the labour market, either having made rather over-optimistic kind of views about their ability to survive subsequently, or not, that they are actually knowing that they're going to be pretty impoverished but don't feel they have any choice. And that's very serious. And so what we can do to address those increasing levels of poverty in the older generation too, I think is really important. Helen, a slightly different question for you. Do you think there's hidden bias in your organisation, either in recruitment or retention and talent development, and what have you done about that?
I think the answer to that question for all of us will be yes, because there just is.
Right.
And you have to acknowledge that and then start to think about how you can make it better, but will you ever take it out? Not sure. However, I think around recruitment processes, you can definitely do loads of things now to take it out. Not asking for dates of birth to start with is probably a really great place to be. And I think lots of organisations do that now. But I think there are some pretty fundamental things you can do on the recruitment process. And there are a number of organisations. We used an organisation called the Clear Company, who actually helped and worked with us to look at our recruitment processes absolutely end to end, to take away bias from any angle and intersectionality when it came to bias. And I think, you've got to start there, and you've got to take somebody with their professional expertise to help you do that, because I don't think you always see it yourselves, especially if it's a process you've designed. To then try and critique it can be very, very difficult. So I think you should seek external support to do that. Then when I think it comes to development programs, there are many things you can do. So for example, we don't have an age limit on apprentices. So I think our oldest apprentice so far in our funeral care business was actually 82. And you know, that's an amazing story. But things like that, I think, make a difference. And I think they make a difference in two ways. They make a difference to the individuals who actually join the apprenticeship scheme, as it did to the gentleman I was talking about. But it makes a difference when you talk about those things and advertise those things about what other people therefore think of you as an employer. So if I know that about the co-op, and I'm perhaps struggling to get a job because I think other organisations are age biased, then I might look at us and think, well, if the co-op hasn't got an age limit on apprentices, then maybe they might be more sympathetic to my application. So I think you get a double whammy really from making those kind of decisions, and I think they're really important. And I also think what you've got to do is to start advertising the flexibility that you provide. Both, you know, if I think about our retail organisation, if I think about our funeral care organisation, there are lots of opportunities to work flexibly because, you know, actually in both industries, we fulfil customers' needs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So the concept of full-time is a nonsense at that point because nobody's full-time because nobody works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I think it's conversations and the way we advertise roles in that sense that makes a difference, because I can guarantee no matter what sort of job or what hours somebody can work, as an organisation we've probably got a job available in some shape or form that would support that person. But we probably don't talk about it enough, we don't advertise it enough, we don't have that conversation. So I think there's lots that everybody can do in that space.
Why do you think you don't talk about it more?
Because, you know, think about my advertising colleague here, am I right? You know, it's to actually buy the amount of media time to have the right conversation or to get the right articles placed in the right, you know, online newspapers is really tricky. So it's almost got to be a national conversation about age rather than any one business being able to have the whole conversation. And I think that's what we need to start thinking about as a society, because we're facing down the barrel of a very big gun, which is this shortage in the labour market. I was talking to a colleague who works in the NHS recently, and the NHS have estimated there are 1 million shifts a day not being currently covered. Now that's horrific.
It's terrible, isn't it? Yeah.
So we've got to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, Pauline, apart from taking the blame for you know the whole of the fact that the co-op can't get their message out there, advertising kind of also has a kind of traditionally quite a young image, doesn't it? So tell us about bias and how you've addressed it.
Well, I like to think that I was really young, and then when I was called by Dentsu, I was like, oh, I'm a bit old for that role. Like advertising, where I had actually played a small, I'd worked for 20 odd years ago. And I remember thinking my own perception and bias of, oh, it's really buzzy, it's trendy, it's drinking, it's, you know, late nights, it's all of those things that I probably don't want anymore. And actually it was a bit like that 20 odd years ago. I'm pleased to say it has changed somewhat. So there are some changes in the industry. But that perception and internally that also happens because we start to think about we need young talent to come in order for us to think about what the younger talent want. So and there is, you know, we shouldn't misunderstand, suggest that older people don't understand what the metaverse is, as an example, and therefore only the younger audience and the young talent coming in are the ones that can help us to design and move into this new virtual world. I mean, I was slightly concerned, but you know, if I go with the flow in terms of how we are starting to change and how we are changing the use of technology, that's okay across all generations. Everyone is able to use different technologies and so forth. So from a media perspective and an advertising perspective, you've really got to think about actually we are still trying to appeal to everyone. And those in their 80s and 90s are using technology in the same way. And so why would you exclude them from your workforce when you start to think about how you design products or how you attract or advertise to them? So I think there's one piece there. We recognise that at Dentsu, our UK team have done a really brilliant sort of focus on age, really thinking about how they address the challenges of the lack of workers at the older end in our industry. And for us, we've started by starting to work with an organisation called 55 Redefined, really thinking about how we train our recruiters to ensure that they're removing bias in the recruitment process. I too have worked with the Clear Company, great really for the end-to-end design, because it's both the advertising of the roles, as you said, the job design, as well as the recruitment process and the onboarding as well. So that's really critical. The apprenticeship programs, again, you know, in the advertising space, as roles go, you know, as they evolve, we need to bring people in and we need to retain the expertise that they have, whether that's in the media or the creative side. And we want to make sure that we can retain those individuals in our organisations, but also thinking about those as they rotate into roles. So returner programs, you know, just consider that 20 odd years ago, we were thinking about 3, maybe 4 generations in the workforce. We're now talking about 5 generations in the workforce, and actually retiring at 55, 60 is a thing of the past. Many people want to continue to work and have to, as we've talked about. So why would you want to, and you know, career for life, job for life, lots of people want to try different things. And so why wouldn't you take the skills that someone has and really think about how you can career transition them into a different industry at, you know, 20 years of skills, 30 years of experience in a different industry. So really thinking about those career transition programs, that's the next step for us, is thinking about how we can develop a career transition program that enables us to attract talent of the older workforce to come in and help them to move and try out a new career in advertising. I think that is also a real way that we can continue to think differently. The only other thing I'd say is that, of course, we know that, you know, I think about, you know, 10, 15 years ago, the conversation on age was very much about the differences, the younger and the older workforce, their different value systems. The reality is the value systems are very much the same. They don't really change. And if anything, the pandemic might have even made that clearer, that the value sets of the older generation, and the research tells us this, they are actually the same. They do want the same things. So we don't want to sit back and go, well, the millennials, they want flexible working. So did the baby boomers. So, you know, and they're both working in the organisation. So let's not make it about one group. Let's make sure that we make these policies available for all.
I mean, listening to you, it's very clear, isn't it? A lot of the practices, the good ideas that have come from your organisations are going to benefit your whole workforce, which is really important because you're all very busy people. You've got a lot on your agenda, and you know, if there's 10 facets of diversity, it can all be a bit overwhelming, can't it? And you go, oh my God, now you've come along and you said, now I've got to think about age as well. You know, I've thought about religion and I've thought about ethnicity. Now you're telling me I've got to think about age. And I think what I'm hearing from you is that actually you do it will benefit other aspects of diversity as well. I kind of the feeling, Jane, you wanted to say a little bit about hidden bias. Is that fair?
And certainly from our work with the Big Window and from our colleague panel, I think the bias is really deep, and we've got a lot to educate ourselves and each other about what's okay and what's acceptable. I think the biggest thing that I learned is once we started to look at the research and speak to our panel was around the confidence in people. And I think because of what's gone on for many years now, you know, where people are and how they feel, and as people are applying for jobs, or can I put myself forward for that training program, should I do that, it's really low. And therefore I think as we think about attracting and retaining, we need to remind ourselves that for this population, they have lost so much confidence. And therefore you know, we did our panel of, you know, we have one wonderful colleague that's joined us in technology, and she had left her previous organisation because she'd had so many occasions, early 50s, people said, when are you going to retire? She said, in the end, it just absolutely knocked her confidence to keep getting this question because she has no plans on retiring. Could you imagine just going up to a colleague and saying, like, when are you going to leave? It just doesn't work. Yeah? So it was so offensive to her. And as we got deep into the conversation and people start to open up about their stories, my learning is that goes quite deep, and therefore we've got a lot to help people heal and have confidence and belief that things are different. And what I've loved hearing from my colleagues here is that organisations are really waking up to this, and I think society is waking up to it, and we have to, because we're in the biggest employment crisis we've ever been in. So it is time to do something about it.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? That what are acceptable questions?
Yeah.
And what are the implications? People don't stop and think. And like you say, it's very clear.
You know, and we see, you know, because of the research we do and around the customers we serve, you know, as you get older, you know exactly what we said. You want to be valued for your experience, your wisdom, what you can bring. But quite often we could see advertising, not you, but we can see advertising, the tone of voice, and how people talk to people, and it can be patronising. And as you get older, the one thing you don't want is to be patronised, made to feel smaller, diminished in any way, and therefore the tone of voice that we use. We've got so much to learn, and how we think really purposefully about the tone and what we say, and of course what we do.
Really interesting. Pauline, I think you've touched a bit on this. In terms of development programs and developing talent, how do you monitor the ages of people who participate? What are you looking at in relation to that?
So I'm not going to say yes, I'm going to say no. We don't monitor the age of those going through our talent development programs. And I think that's probably the same for many organisations. But what I will say is that the point that we need to monitor is age across the employment life cycle. So what's the age range of the candidates that choose to apply for your roles, firstly, and then get through to interview, and then get through to securing a role, and thinking about age in that perspective. So are we attractive to all age ranges? Is there something happening in our recruitment process that is stopping them getting through from applying to securing an interview, as an example? So that's one area that we don't do, but that's one that we really want to get quite forensic on.
Have you been doing that in relation to other protected characteristics?
We do it for some other protected characteristics.
But not for age yet.
Not yet for age. Now, it's not that we don't collect data on age. We have the data. It's just that the way, and I've been at Dentsu for 9 months, so I'm not really worried about the advertising. I've been there 9 months, so it's okay. We're about to change our approach around, and we've been doing that quite a bit around data, getting really phonetic about the data that we have and how we can utilise it to inform the programmes that we put in place. The other end is also attrition. How often it's sort of this element of, we're losing all of our young people. Well, you probably will, because they also want to go around and try different roles, and 5 years, 10 years in an organisation, they may well move on, but we never think about that for the older workers. So changing the question and going, actually, are we losing the talent at the older end of our workforce is the one that we're now starting to look at from an attrition perspective. So how do we get them in, and who are we losing is a really big piece before we start to think about the programs, because the programs need to be designed based on what the data tells us. Yeah. So if we're losing people, then why is that? And is it to do with the flexible working or the ability to work in a more hybrid environment? Is it because we're not really tapping into their expertise and we need to really engage them in mentoring and sponsorship programs? There are different ways in which we can motivate and engage the individuals in our organisations. So some of the things we're doing this year is, so for example, we are redesigning our data insights and our data dashboards, probably because I'm just slightly obsessed with data, so that becomes one. We're looking at bringing in a sponsorship program that really helps to think about some of the talent in our organisation, and I'm particularly hoping that we see particularly some of the women of the older age group that are aligned with more senior professionals to really start to raise their profile around the organisation. So tackling two elements there, looking at both gender and age together. And sponsorship being very different to mentoring. So advocating for the talent in your organisation finding those opportunities, not making an assumption that because they're of a certain age they might not want to go on a 3-month project, or because they've got children, or otherwise, or they're too old to travel, whatever. So not making that assumption. So those are some really big pieces that we're doing for this year. And then the final piece is really making sure that we get the message around age across the organisation in multiple locations, because it is an issue in locations outside of the UK. It is also an issue across the globe. So we really need to make sure we do that as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Really interesting. We've just got a very little bit more time. So I would like to, there have been so many good ideas that I hope people have heard and you can be shared and people will try. So really, really appreciate that. What do you find most exciting about this agenda and in this space? What do you kind of want, this kind of energize people to take it away and feel really determined to do something about it? Can I ask you first, Jane?
Yeah. I think for me it's the discovery side of it. It's something that's gone on for forever in our culture, but it's so new in its conversation as we start to have that and people realise and they start thinking deep about their experiences and when you said lying on the CV, and when you start to question that and think and those moments, and I think it's just seeing for the first time in these conversations these popcorn moments. And I'm finding that really exciting, because I think it's from the stories and the experience that will really drive change.
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's the opportunity, because talent has no age limit. And I think if we have that kind of mindset, we'll probably start to do things in a very, very different way. And I think that is really exciting. And I think it's a really interesting conversation. And if you look at intersectionality, if you start focusing on how do you attract people that you haven't attracted before, you should address all aspects of inclusion, diversity and belonging if you even start to tackle age.
So in a way it's kind of, like I said before, it will help you do other things as well.
Absolutely.
You can tick a number of boxes, perhaps while focusing on one, and particularly if you're sensitive, as Pauline, you were saying, to the intersectionality issues that we all need to do more work on. Absolutely. Pauline, what do you think? What makes you excited about this?
Well, you can't hide from it, that's for sure. And I think that's a really key piece. I was listening to an economist yesterday speak about diversity and inclusion, and they said something that has been sitting on my mind, so I'm going to share it back with you. It was very much around, and I can't be as articulate as them because I'm not an economist, but it was very much around the fourth industrial revolution and the fact that we need diversity. And if you think of diversity in all its facets, because if we don't have diversity, then the jobs that are out there may as well be done by robots. Yeah. So we need the diversity, and that is diversity across all 10 facets as identified in the report. It's because otherwise those jobs won't be here anymore. And so we need to tap into the resources, and we need to be able to retain that experience and that wealth of wisdom at the top end, and be able to use that with the bottom end of the age range. So you can't run from it.
Doesn't look like anyone's running at the moment. But for me to say thank you so much to the panellists, and for me too, the exciting, I never thought I would actually work in this sphere, but having come to work in this sphere now, really exciting, both about the impact it has on me as an individual, on my own personal interactions with family, and then on my work and the conversations I'm having. And I think, age is everyone's business. This is about employment, this is about inclusion, but actually, like you say, no one can run from it. So thank you so very much. If you're joining us virtually, please, apparently I'm told to ask you to look to the left of your screen for speed networking and a virtual booth during the ad break. Don't forget to tag Dial Global and use our social media, is that right? Dial Global, have I got that right? Okay, and use our social media handle, #MovingTheDial. Please do join again after the short break, and there'll be even more amazing people to listen to about how to become a truly accessible and inclusive workplace through a focus on ability, not disability. Sounds really interesting. So enjoy your break, and thank you for listening.
Why do you like to wear neutral colours?
It just goes with everything. Easy, elegant, minimal. Contrast,
Skin tone.
both. It really just depends on how I feel that day.
A sense of expression.
There's nothing neutral about it.
I have all walks of life that come and sit in my chair, and I love connecting with them. Clients share their opinion with me, and it's like, oh wow, I didn't even think about it from that perspective. That's what people's minds are at, but you just want to make sure that what you're talking about is legit. When there is a disagreement, that excites me. I like there to be some flavor.
From Belfast to Birmingham, from Cardiff to King's Lynn, every corner of the country is served by our hard-working, talented team who make us the best at what we do. We're Blair the Fixer. We're Emma the Revenue Protector. We are Murray the Meet and Greet Man. We're the Transporters, the Postcode Precisionists and the Night Managers, the Mail Detectives and the Stamp Stoppers. We're collecting and connecting. We are guarding UK letterboxes. We are caring for our crew. No matter what we do, no matter where we are, we all play a vital role keeping the mail moving and delivering a great service for our customers. Early starts, through the night, whatever it takes to get the job done. We are the team that delivers Christmas, the team that keeps customers and communities connected, the team that serves over 30 million addresses across the UK. We're all part of it. We are Royal Mail.
Hello and welcome back to the Dial Global Virtual and, for those of you in the room, in-person summit, which is entitled Inclusive Leadership, Championing a Culture of Inclusion and Allyship. This panel is titled How to Become a Truly Accessible, that's not working, is it? Is it working? Yes. A truly accessible and inclusive, thank you, workplaces through a focus on ability, not disability. My name is Diane Lightfoot and I am the CEO at Business Disability Forum. I am delighted to be joined by three phenomenal leaders who I'm delighted to welcome to the Dial Global virtual and actual stage. They are Paulette Cohen, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Barclays, Paul Fox, Inclusive Workplace Consultant at TextHelp, and Anushka Davis, Head of Engagement, Diversity and Inclusion at Softcat. And I will be asking them to introduce themselves properly in a moment. So, despite hearing about the advantages that people with disabilities can offer employers, too many companies still hold themselves back when it comes to hiring people with a range of disabilities. Some see hiring, again, some people with disabilities as being the right thing to do, but don't necessarily also believe that it's good for their business, that it's part of a talent strategy that will actually help them become more competitive and outweigh what they see as any potential complications or risks, which indeed there may not be at all. So that mindset risks really putting companies at a disadvantage when it comes to reaching the widest possible talent pool and acquiring and leveraging the talent that all of us need in today's increasingly tight job market. However, it's great that many leaders, including the three here today, are challenging these outdated mindsets and are forging new paths for talent management and reaping the rewards as a result. So in today's panel, our leaders will share their experiences about how they are creating truly inclusive workforces and making sure that they include people who have disabilities that are visible and those that aren't immediately visible. They'll be talking about the benefits they've gained as a result and giving pragmatic advice for organisations who want to make a change. So before we get into the detail, I'm going to ask each of our panellists to tell me a bit more about yourself, where you're from, and why you are so passionate about diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So Paulette, can I come to you first?
Yeah, Diane, thank you very much. Hello to everyone. I'm Paulette Cohen. I'm the Head of Diversity and Inclusion, as Diane said, for UK, Europe, and the Middle East for Barclays. And I've been in this role for just over 6 years. But I have an unconventional background. I come from the not-for-profit sector, and I think my passion comes from being driven by societal impact. What can we do to truly make a change? And as a woman who was in a leadership role at a very young age, I really experienced the challenges that was from a gender perspective. I'm a Jewish woman. I loved the last session in the latter half of her career, and I'm a great ally around our other agendas. I've been an LGBT+ ally for many years, and I've really learned so much about the disability and mental health agenda that I'd like to think that that's part of the driver for my passion.
Thank you, Paulette, and I can certainly vouch for seeing that passion at first hand, and it's been my great pleasure to work with you for the last 5 years and a bit, and it comes as no surprise to me that you were a senior leader at a young age either, so there we are.
Of course, I am on the board of BDF, so that
yes.
Is our connection, Diane.
Yes, indeed. Not that that's obviously affects my opinion at all. Paul, can I come to you next?
Yep, sure thing. So Paul Fox, I work to help provide assistive software and technology solutions into the workplace to boost inclusion and make sure that people are maximising their potential and their abilities. I'm with TextHelp Group. We're headquartered in Northern Ireland, but we have offices now in the States, Australia, and in the Nordics as well. So quite a reach, and it's interesting to see how that demand for the sort of services we provide is increasing, and thankfully people seem to be more aware and acknowledging it. I'm somewhat the reverse of Paulette. I spent 20 years in banking before getting to where I am now, and actually travelled via the third sector as well. I'd served on the board of a charity in Northern Ireland called Stepping Stones, which worked to transition people with learning difficulties, learning disabilities from education to workplace. So could see a lot of the challenges and that there are around recruiting talent for ability and not seeing the disability. I have a brother who's severely learning disabled, autistic, and several mental health issues. So it's something that's been very close to home all my life, and I think that's probably where the passion lies. Having seen that through the charitable venture and personal life, I'm delighted to be where I am now and doing something practical to hopefully improve things around inclusion and recruitment.
Well, you definitely are, and it's wonderful to have you here. And I didn't know that about your learning disability background. I worked for a learning disability organisation for 13 years before I joined BDF. Obviously, I started when I was 5, but you know,
Yeah.
that's what we all do.
Like myself.
Yeah. Anushka.
Hello everyone, my name is Anushka. I am Head of Employee Engagement, Diversity and Inclusion at Softcat. I also look after our mental health strategy, and as a side hustle I am a HR business partner for our CIO as well. So I'm really lucky to have a very, very varied role. Softcat are an IT reseller in the tech sector. So as you can imagine, when it comes to the tech sector, it's quite a male-dominated industry to be in. I've been in it for 21 years myself. I've worked at Softcat and kind of forged my way into the role that I'm doing now. And I guess my passion for D&I came specifically after I had 2 children, came back, knew I didn't want to have any more children again, and decided to kind of focus on my career and realised that I couldn't see anybody who looked like me at any leadership level role, so let alone any women, no ethnic minority employees either at leadership level, to which I challenged our organisation at the time and was given the opportunity to do something about it, which has also meant that I can work with what we call our channel with partners like Microsoft and Dell and HP in order to try and make our industry a more inclusive environment to be in as well. So when it comes to Softcat, we've got a very young age demographic, so our average age is 29, which means that when people talk and say something as part of my engagement role, if we want to focus on, we obviously want to focus on being an employer of choice, so we want to make sure that we can kind of evolve as an organisation. What's good today isn't good tomorrow, which means that continuous improvement means we can kind of tackle things pretty quickly.
That sounds amazing, Anushka. I'm going to come to you with my first question in a minute, but technology, of course, is such an enabler and such a game changer, as we've all seen firsthand in the last 2 years. So, a few questions, Anushka, for you to kick us off. Then, so what are the most exciting and perhaps most important changes in working environments that you're seeing today for people with visible and non-visible disabilities?
Yeah, thank you. So I kind of mentioned at Softcat things can happen at speed because of the wonderful voices that we have that we can react to. Softcat has a number of employee resource groups, and actually when we were talking earlier, our Empowering Disability and Neurodiversity Network, which is called the EDN network at Softcat, we launched that back of last year, and you might think, well, someone who's passionate about D&I, why did we launch that so later on as a network? I'll be really honest, it's probably the one that I was the most nervous about. It's such a broad area to focus on, and I kind of wanted to get it right in terms of the sensitivities related to all these different hidden disabilities and invisible and visible disabilities. But then we had to just bite the bullet, and we got to a place actually through COVID where a lot of our employees started to open up about their disabilities, particularly their invisible disabilities. And what kind of struck me at that point was that we had actually created a very safe environment at Softcat where people could be vocal, which allowed us to kind of create this community where we could start to look at how we can evolve as a company. In the comfort of their own homes, that everyone was able to share their experiences, which meant actually when it came to working back in the office, we could kind of make things happen really quickly. So when it comes to the excitement factor in all of this. It's kind of, we've listened, we've learned, and we can react to it really quickly, particularly from a technology perspective as well. When the network was formed, they focused on three key priorities. One was education and awareness, which a lot of our employees are sharing their own experiences, which immediately, as colleagues, we can start to ask more questions, we can have more empathy. It allows us to think a little bit more about the human being behind the job title as well. We looked at supporting those employees in a different way as well. So we've changed a lot of our processes internally at Softcat as a result of that. So, you know, you've got your recruitment processes, but actually when new people join our organisation, what is it they need to make sure their experience is a really positive one right from the offset? And it sounds like it's a no-brainer really, but if you think about, like, we recruit in the region of about 450, 500 people a year. So the process is quite slick, and before you know it, you forget about some of the minor detail, or the smaller details that will actually have a really positive impact on people who have disabilities in itself. So we worked really hard on some of those processes. And the final one was just celebrating people and their differences and their unique personalities as well. And it's just had such a positive impact in terms of our culture and evolving our culture as well, which is a massive part of my role when it comes to employee engagement. I think the biggest thing from an open and honesty perspective, like I've said at the beginning, is by people being open about the challenges that they might face, or their experiences at work, or whether they need a bigger screen or whatever it might be. It means that we can do things a little bit quicker so that we can support them. I think also the fact that our leadership team are really honest about things as well. So our services director is really open and honest about the caring responsibilities that he has from a disability perspective for his son. And that's meant that he's been able to influence people and kind of inspire people to talk as well, which has had a really positive impact as well. And I guess the other exciting, when I call it exciting because it does enthuse me, is the collaboration between our other networks. We've got 7 different ERGs, and one of my key things that I wanted to focus on for this calendar year is the maturity of our networks, but also the key collaboration. So our Pride community connecting with our EDN network. We were really honoured to have Rosie Jones. I'm a massive fan of Rosie Jones. I don't know if anybody knows who Rosie Jones is, but she's a fabulous comedian. She's a lesbian. She's got cerebral palsy, and she came to a virtual event and spoke about her challenges from a working aspect. We had a right giggle along the way as well, and that collaboration just really kind of humanises it all and just kind of normalises everything as well. So I think those kind of there's practical things that we've done, like most organisations will do with around lighting or accessibility or quiet spaces. Those things they're not easy to do straight away, but the bigger thing for me has been just people being able to open up, be honest, share their stories, and lead and inspire others as well.
You're so right about culture, and that's so central to all of this.
Yeah.
And I also think you're not alone in setting up your disability resource group as the last one, because so many people think that that's the most difficult. So it's fabulous that you've done it. But yeah, the importance of sharing stories, especially from senior leaders, and making it feel safe for others to ask is absolutely
really
critical. Paul or Paulette, would you like to come in on anything that we've said?
Yeah, it struck me that the senior buy-in, I think, is massive, and it's that safe space to encourage people to speak up, disclose, come together. Even just recently in Textile, thankfully, it was one of the employees through it in our water cooler chat, as we call it, did somebody want to form a neurodiverse employees group? And that hasn't happened for years. That's great to see. I think probably the mix of cultures across the globe coming together and feeling safe to do that was good. And the other thing you mentioned too, it was so apparent to us, I think there's a huge opportunity that the pandemic, if there's any positives to come out of it, is the way it accelerated things and let us see how many people probably with undeclared or hidden disabilities had developed their coping mechanisms in the workplace through employee support, fabrics surrounding them, and suddenly were sent home to work and couldn't because they didn't have the support they needed. And I think that presents a huge opportunity for us to latch on to and really build from. We don't squander that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything that you said, Anushka. It's fabulous to hear the progress in the organisation. I think one of the most exciting things at the moment is that this agenda is being focused on. And I think that the very essence of what you just shared proved that, and I think we're seeing that as well. And I think that really is the excitement at the moment. And I know around the board table of BDF, we're seeing companies who really want to focus on this agenda, who want to understand what they can do, really seeing the benefit of the talents that people can bring to the table. And to your point, Paul, I think people have learnt that that our disabled colleagues have a lot to share with all of our colleagues and so much to learn. And it's challenging those myths that you talked about at the start, Diane. And I think that's where we are at the moment. My colleagues know I talk about Diversity Olympics, an idea that I stole from someone else mercilessly. And I think a lot of people would have said that the disability agenda was the one, the last DRG to be set up or the most difficult to talk about. And I don't see that anymore. And for me, that's genuinely exciting.
It is exciting. And I don't think any of us expected 2 years ago to be where we are now. But companies are realising that they can recruit differently, that they need that talent. And that is amazing to see. So I think that links me nicely into my next question for you, Paulette, to kick us off. So what programmes are you championing to create more equality and diversity for disabled people?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I really appreciate it. It's not something new that we've focused on at Barclays. It has been one of our long-standing agendas. Our ERG is well established, and I'll come to that in a second. But we've really embraced and acknowledged the exceptional talents that the disabled community can bring to the business. For us, it is not just the right thing to do, as you alluded to at the start. And there really is a commercial purpose for this and a real recognition of the value that the talents the disabled community can bring to us. So it's interesting you use the word equality, because one of the things that we have recently prioritised and really shone a light on in Barclays is the sense of equity. And taking an equitable approach is particularly important for all communities, but especially for our colleagues with a disability, mental health or neurodiverse condition, because it's about making sure that you've got a targeted and focused approach. And I think that's what we've been doing. We've recognised that our disabled community help us to understand our customers better. They help to bring more creative thinking and creative problem solving into the organisation. And they're hugely committed and resilient. And that example that we've just shared about the pandemic shows that there's a real two-way learning here. So I've selected just a handful of programmes at all stages of the colleague journey. And the first one is really a channel that we called Able to Enable. And it was an initiative that we launched a few years ago. And at the moment, it's very focused on bringing neurodiverse talent into our technical centres. Really understanding the skills and experience and insight that neurodivergent colleagues can bring to us. And Able to Enable has encouraged us to do a high-touch approach to changing our hiring process. So making sure that we have different assessment centres, making sure that the interviewers are trained in how to assess talent coming in. We were talking earlier on about, are people at interview expected to be tripped up to show perhaps not their skills, but to show that they can't do something. And whilst I won't necessarily agree with that, I think that the assessment process for some diverse talent really needs to be adapted, and we've absolutely done that. And one of the other things we've done, Anushka mentioned buildings and accessibility, is design some of our buildings for difference, in particular our main tech centres, so that they are a really welcoming and open place for people on the autistic spectrum or neurodivergent talent to join us as an organisation. So I think that's the example that I give at the hiring perspective. We do, within the realms of what is appropriate through an HR process, ask people to share whether they have any adjustments at the earliest stage in the hiring process, but we now carry that all the way through. What it means is when someone's onboarded into the organisation, they don't have to wait for those adjustments. And we were finding that people had a really long time lag between joining us and then being able to perform at their best. So another initiative that we've done is really challenge that and make sure that we can have those adjustments in place quite early on. And at Barclays, we have a workplace adjustment passport, enables people to have a conversation about their adjustments and take that with them through their career at Barclays. And we've seen that really brings huge benefits, because someone's not having to go over the same conversation again and again every time they progress. We, like Anushka's organisation, have a really great employee resource group. Ours is called REACH. And I think for ongoing support, REACH has shown that we have different focus groups within REACH, that support network for our disabled colleagues is there. And we have added to that, a bit like you were saying, Paul, we've had people say, I'd like a focus group focused on dyslexia. Our neurodiversity focus group is one of the newest. So it's really active, and what it does is it drives the power of storytelling. And you made reference to that, and it was colleagues from REACH who launched something called This Is Me nearly 10 years ago, which harnesses the power of storytelling so someone can share information about their own conditions, but they're not defined by it. And it's brilliant to see that picked up by other organisations. I think there are 400 other companies that have now adopted This Is Me. But it was started by our ERG. And then the final programme that I did just want to touch on is sort of about progression, development and progression. And again, it came from REACH, but we have set up a bespoke mentoring programme through REACH and for colleagues. And it's a sort of two-way. It's both traditional mentoring and reverse mentoring. So a colleague who identifies as having a condition is married with a senior leader as their mentor. They learn from the insights of their mentor. But actually, more significantly, I'd like to think, the mentors are learning from their mentees, and they're really understanding that lived experience. And we've seen incredible progress through the pilots that we've had of this mentoring program, that people really are progressing through the organisation. And for me, that's a brilliant example of equity. A lot of people talk about one size fits all. And I think when we're talking about harnessing the talent of our disabled colleagues, actually, that's the antithesis of equity. And those examples probably show that.
I completely agree. I think one size practically never fits anybody, actually. And I've got to call out This Is Me. I love This Is Me. And it's such a simple but such a powerful tool. Like all the best ideas, it's the kind of, why didn't I think of that idea? But it's just brilliant in framing disability or a condition as just part of a person, a part of a human condition. It's wonderful. I also really like your point about adjustments. So we did a survey 3 years ago now, the Great Big Workplace Adjustment Survey, and one figure that stuck with me was that 8%, only 8, but still, 8% of people who answered had waited more than 2 years. And imagine not being able to function properly and do your job properly for 2 years, and what that would do to you and your relationship with your co-workers. So that is brilliant. And yeah, neurodiversity recruitment. We need to really think differently about how we recruit for lots of reasons. So we might, if we get time, unpick that a bit more. But Anushka or Paul, anything you want to kind of respond to on what Paulette's been talking about?
Yeah, I think touching on your topic there about This Is Me, we've got one similar. We've got one called Proud to Be Me. And I mean, as a tech company, we've got lots of screens around all of our offices as well. So it's quite nice to have people's faces flash up. And I remember, I think it was a couple of months ago, our network actually did one which was, I'm proud to be me, but this is actually somebody who's really famous and similarly has this condition as well. Just to kind of make it a bit more relatable, and the fact that Jennifer Aniston or whoever has successfully formed a career and actually it's not stopped them. So it's just kind of, again, normalising those contexts. The other thing that I don't know if any of your organisations do, but it's worked really nicely at Softcat is a programme called the Allyship programme, which is a really simple programme, but we launched it in June last year as a company-wide initiative, and it's a 2-part workshop, but all people can join from all sorts of demographics, different offices, and the idea is that you could be sat on a call and you could be on a workshop with the CEO, and it's all about just talking about yourselves, but it just provides really good debate and discussion, and actually a safe space to ask any questions that you want from a curiosity perspective. But we've focused on all the content that everyone's a little bit nervous about talking about, so everything's to do with microaggressions or what you might deem as banter, which actually isn't banter, and all those things about what can you do as a softcatter to be a better work colleague to the person sat next to you or your customers, in fact, as well. So that's kind of landed really, really well at Softcat.
That's really interesting, and I think that piece around you don't know what you don't know, and you need to learn from people about actually what's okay and what isn't, and also language evolves. That's a whole different topic. We probably shouldn't get onto that panel, or we'll be here all day. Paul, was there anything you wanted to add to that one?
Yeah, definitely. That two-way learning idea is so important, and I mean, at TextHelp we provide software, for instance, to support people with dyslexia. And the number of people that come to organisation, I think we're quite proud of the fact we see so many people achieve a late diagnosis by working with us, and then realising when the support's there, the difference it makes to their lives. But when we then have neurodiverse employees on the workforce forming this group, speaking up, it's a non-stop learning process, and it's a fantastic checkpoint for the organisation, because I think you mentioned it does help you understand your community better if you have that more diverse and inclusive grouping. And yeah, even just the other day we were talking about a new project coming up, and it was somebody spoke up and raised questions around accessibility of how something was being presented, and it was just so easy. You could have been so much further down the road without considering it properly, even though you think you're good at this stuff. So yeah, it's crucially important. And the adjustments piece, Diane, we're so passionate about saying things like having software there to support people with dyslexia, have it in the organisation across the board, freely available. It's there when you arrive, rather than this 2-year wait and somebody struggling to get their work done. And I think even the point you made, Paulette, about the building being open and welcoming, I think having those sort of proactive adjustments already in place throws your organisational door wide open and makes it a more welcoming organisation, and more likely you would have people with disabilities, either seen or unseen, neurodivergent conditions, looking to join your organisation and bring their talent to you.
Yeah, then you become a kind of destination employer, don't you?
Exactly.
Literally. I love the thing about having software freely available. I remember some years ago, Paulette, it was one of your colleagues at Barclays, saying that you had you could self-serve certain adjustments, and it was just before Christmas, and you could see everyone kind of looking at each other like, how does that work? And I did say, well, unless you're going to buy everyone speech-to-text software for Christmas, it's probably not going to be abused, is it? People are going to get it if they need it. So it is that adult, mature, empowering people and trusting people that is so important. So, related to what you were saying very nicely, Paul, almost by magic, why is it critical that everyone makes their products accessible for people with disabilities?
God, there's so many reasons why. You could answer the question very simply by saying it's the right thing to do. It's that simple. It should be done. And so many people still don't do the right thing. Too many organisations see disability as too difficult, both externally and internally. But I mean, the reasons why it needs to be done, we talk about equity now, but the old bankers said, only when I hear equity, I think of something different and think of value in your company. And if you're not acquiring the right talent, and that could be somebody with specific support needs, a disability seen or unseen, you know, you're not going to be a sustainable company. You will lose that talent to others, and you will fail to innovate, you'll fail to develop. And if that happens, you won't have a business venture to continue with. In terms of making all things accessible, it's the buildings we spoke about, but it's every element of product and service. If your products and services are not accessible, people can't get to them, people won't buy them. Again, it's the death knell for the business. But back to the talent and the workforce business, if we link it to that, you could have the best internal support mechanisms and the best balance within your workforce. But if people can't see that and they can't see how to apply to join that, well then it's all for nothing. So it really needs to be a journey with the accessibility piece right from the very outset. You know, you need to think about building everything in the business with accessibility front and center. So everything, the recruitment process, yes, it needs to improve and be different for people with neurodivergent conditions, but you know, is your website accessible? Are your recruitment adverts and materials truly accessible? You know, needs to start there. Things like having the proactive adjustments on the shelf for people coming in, rather than have to come in and go over hurdles to do that. It's, I mean, it's all encompassing if you think about it. Any hurdles to accessibility, whether physical or digital, whatever, it's just going to inhibit business growth, development, innovation process. And it's a strange thing. You ask why it's important people do it, and it comes down to that thing of, is it them choosing to tick a box, so to speak? Is it being seen to do the right thing? Or is it simply because it arises and it becomes a challenge? It's something that has to be met and done, reacting to a request. And, you know, that certainly is not the right way to do it. If you think about having existing employees in the workplace, so what's the statistic? 83% of disabilities being acquired. If you have somebody in your workplace who develops a disability through accident or injury, and you know them, you know their talent, you would bend over backwards to make the adjustments and keep them on board. Yet, why is it still such a challenge that we can't do that and have that in mind from the outset to make things truly accessible, welcoming, and cater for as many people? I know one size does not fit all, but we can look to develop different sizes and different solutions and have them in place for people. So yeah, I think the importance of having it accessible, definitely if you're going to be seen as a destination employer, an employer of choice, if you're going to hire and develop the right talent, if you're going to afford people the right opportunity and truly promote equity, then I think everything you do has to have accessibility considered within it.
Your point about the cost of adjustments is very well made. I mean, today is also Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and one of our partners, Atos, is very active in that, but did a piece of research internally, and they found that on average, the cost of making an adjustment to retain someone who acquired a disability was only 7% of what it would have cost them to rehire, and that doesn't take into account the organisational knowledge and learning and experience. So it is good for business as well, and when you have a diverse workforce, you're going to get more accessible products and services because you know what the problems are and you design them out. I think the figures are in the UK that the purple pound, so-called, is estimated at £274 billion. So that's the spending power of disabled people and their families. And globally, the market the size of China. So why wouldn't you want a piece of that? It really makes no sense. And accessible products are good for other people too. They're good for many, many people. Paulette, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on that. And it's a phrase that you've probably seen associated with colleagues in Barclays before now. There were 2 points that I wanted to pick up on what Paul said, and one relates to your final point there. We've used the phrase, a solution for one is a solution for many. So if you are designing and meeting the needs of people with disabilities, health conditions, you are impacting so many more people as well. And the example that we give is our talking ATMs. And I think we now say 100% of our ATMs have the potential to put a headset in. And of course, it has a significant impact for people with a visual impairment. But it also has a real impact for anyone who is struggling to see the screen, You know, if there's really bad lighting, it's just a really good product, and it's brilliantly designed, and it meets the needs of many people. So I love that phrase. Whether we do it all the time, possibly not, but is it something that's embedded in how we think? Yes. But the other point that Paul triggered in me was this whole sense of future-proofing something and designing for difference from the start. And that is much better than retrofitting something. So if you've just gone ahead and designed a product, a building, a service, and it is not accessible, it is not meeting the needs of your customers or your colleagues, and you have to change it, the cost of doing that is so much greater than building it in at the start. And we're really finding that with our new site in Glasgow, which has been designed right from the start for making sure that it is truly accessible, meets the needs of all of our colleagues. It has great quiet spaces. It's been designed with that in mind, and we've partnered with Autism Scotland and Scottish Autism and Motion Spot, and that's when you get really tip-top, accessible, beautiful facilities, and that's got nothing to do with it being built under the disability agenda.
It's aspirational, isn't it? Yeah.
Like to think so. I
Yes.
hope one day, Diane, it will be award-winning, but we'll get to
You know,
that.
I'm sure it will be, Paulette.
One day.
Paul, did you want to come
I was
on
just going to say that sort of we view it as necessary for some, beneficial for all idea is just great. And you mentioned talking ATMs. You know, big bit of what we do is text-to-speech software. But if you think about it, that once upon a time it was viewed as very specific. It was a particular support. You would only use that if there was some really dire need to rely on it. Look at audiobooks now.
Yeah.
Everybody's at them. It's easier. And so why would that apply to work as well? You don't need to be somebody with severe dyslexia to need text-to-speach. It might just be an easier way to get through your work, is to have it spoken to you.
And there are all sorts of people who benefit. I remember the first time I ever saw an AVI ramp on a plane. And if you don't know, you know how you normally go up, rather than a tube, you go up through steps to get on a plane. This is a thing which is just basically a ramp that is accessible to wheelchair users, and that's why it was designed. But I remember standing on this ramp and looking, and pretty much everyone else had a wheelie suitcase. So much better if you have a wheelie suitcase. So much better if you have a buggy, and it's accessible to wheelchair users. So win-win-win, really. Anushka, did you want to come in at all on that one?
The only thing that I thought I'd just bring up in addition to what Paul has said is also about, for organisations particularly as well, is like I've read, 1 in 7 people have a disability, of which 80% are invisible. And if you think about the community that you're serving or your customer base as well, like, everyone is selling a product or everyone is talking to a customer as an end user, is actually, this is obviously about our own employees, and we've got to look after ours first, but also the experience that you can then give back to your customers as well is mutually beneficial from a commercial perspective. And I think people probably forget that element sometimes.
Definitely, you get better problem solving. You design out the problems because you've got people in the room, literally, or on a screen, who actually have the lived experience to go, hang on a minute, that's not accessible, and then you design it out. It just makes sense. So I know that we are almost at the end of our panel. I wanted to ask each of you for like one final thought or top tip or takeaway that you'd like to share with everyone who is in the room today, hello people in the room today, or watching online. So Anushka, I'll come to you first.
My top tip is to not be afraid to kind of just make that step into looking at things like disability or any kind of diversity group or anything really, and particularly when I said at the beginning, like disability and neurodiversity, or that network specifically was the one that I was a bit more nervous about. I just think things are evolving all the time. We were having a conversation about language earlier whilst we were waiting to come on, and language is evolving constantly, so something today that is a good use of language to use is not probably going to be great in a couple of months or years to come. So you've got to kind of make that step and just be almost just okay with being challenged. And if you're okay with that ambiguity, I think you'd be fine.
Yeah, with it going into things with the right intent and
Exactly.
a desire to learn
Yeah.
from your people, it goes such a long way.
Yeah, we can't be perfect with it straight away.
No, thank you, Anushka. Paul?
Yeah, probably just links to something you said. I think the accessibility from the outset that idea of getting it right from the start, design out as early as possible, and that's right across the board. And the reason I say that is back to the points we made about then attracting the talent that allows you to do that very thing, to spot the errors early, design out, look for the innovation, those problem-solving skills, all the key things. And I think if you get that and you have that accessibility right from the start, you will attract and welcome a broader range of people in a more equitable workforce. And the reason that's important, I think it's back to what you said about not banning everybody the software for Christmas, empowering employees then to be adult and speak up safely around these issues. And I think if you do that, you're onto something really magical. And I think you'll only do that if you get it right from the start, attract the people in and give them that safe space then to develop and converse around these things.
Absolutely. And Paulette?
I always hate this question,
Sorry.
Dan, especially when you're the last one to be asked, because everyone else says the great stuff, and you're sitting there going, please don't say that one. Oh God, they've just said that one. And so I 100% agree with what Anushka and Paul have said. So I was just trying to think, what could I add to that? And one of the things that we've done at Barclays, we're just refreshing it at the moment, is we tried to document our route to being, we call it disability confident, and we support the Department of Work and Pensions Disability Confidence Scheme for those in the UK, and we published this report, and it includes what you've both just said. Don't be afraid, take a first step, design for difference. But right at the back, there's a set of the things that we've learned. The first thing that we've learned that I would share is you're never going to get it all right. So don't expect to do so. It's okay to learn, and like all of us on the panel, we've all said we are learning what we should be doing. We're learning with this evolving agenda. But the other thing that's struck me is this concept of top down and bottom up. We've spoken a lot about our colleagues, and listening to our colleagues is so, so important. But you also need that more senior advocacy and championing as well. Allies programs, accountable executives, all of those sorts of things. But don't feel that you just need one or the other. I think you need a top-down and bottom-up approach, and you will certainly get somewhere.
Well, I think that was a wonderful note to end on. So thank you very, very much, Anushka, Paul and Paulette, for being a brilliant panel. I won't repeat and attempt to summarise that, except to say it doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be expensive. It's good for your business. This is about a huge talent pool, a huge market. So I urge you just to think differently and embrace that, and go from why would I do that to why on earth wouldn't I? It's been a brilliant panel, and we are now coming to, I think, the last bit of the summit. So if you are live inside the summit, please look to the left of your screen, live on screen, that is, rather than live in this room. And there will be speed networking and a virtual booth during the ad break. Don't forget to tag Dial Global and also use the social media handle Moving the Dial. And for those of you in the room, I'm sure there will be other arrangements that are equally enjoyable. So a round of applause, and thanks once again to our wonderful panel. Right. What can I say? So this is, for those of you that are joining us virtually, this is the end of the second day of obviously our Dial Global Virtual Summit. So thank you to every single one of us that has joined us virtually as well, and I hope that you have enjoyed it as well. In terms of just a few messages that I know that Layla would want me to deliver on her behalf while she is cuddling and snuggling her brand new beautiful baby boy Peter at the moment as well. So I know how proud Layla is to head up the Dial Global organisation and everything that we achieve with each and every one of you in this room. So an incredible thank you for every single one that has joined us virtually and in person and that has supported us. Also, I'd just like to recognise, you know, yesterday and today, the honesty, the openness, the vulnerability, the authenticity of every single one of our speakers and panellists. The only reason these events work is because you support us, and I think there's been some really critical kind of actions and insights I think everyone can take out of today around inclusive leadership and allyship as well. Also, what I'd just like to say is, you know, Layla, oh my goodness, her belief in this work, and any one of you that knows her as well, her absolute passion, this is 24/7 for Layla in terms of making a difference. And we know that our work matters. When we share ideas, when we share best practice, and when we actually, you know, have peer-to-peer learning, we are unstoppable and we can drive huge change, every single one of us as individuals within our businesses and with our organisations. And I know Layla would want to thank you in terms of every single one of you in terms of what you do to drive that change as well, because that is what we're here to do as well. And it would be remiss of me not to thank our partners. So I would just like to repeat a huge thank you to our partners. So Royal Mail, who have hosted us here today, Text Help, obviously thank you Paul for obviously just being on the panel for us, Marks and Spencer's, Philip Morris International, who you saw with Silke earlier, and she joined us yesterday as well, and also Yahoo, and our media partners as well, so Enable, Fair Play Talks, and also podcast radio in terms of making these events happen as well. So thank you to the Dial Global team. A huge amount of work goes into these events to make these happen, so thank you to each and every team. Thank you to our partners. Thank you to every single one of you in this room, and thank you to every single one of you for being an ally and making a difference out there every single day as well. So for those of us that are for those of you that are joining us virtually, it is officially a wrap. So thank you for being with us. In terms of if you are in person with us, just a little bit of kind of direction for now. So the good news is there is some nibbles and some food and some drinks outside. So there's now going to be a break. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going into 3 learning lounges. So instead of kind of breaking you up into strict groups and anything else, I'll just direct you to where they are, and the Dial Global team will help you go across these as well. So at the back, myself and Michelle will be running the Foundation Learning Lounge. To the left-hand side, which is clearly your right-hand side, is basically Ipsos, who that will be sharing their work. And then on the other side, we've got the wonderful Diane, who of you just seen on panel, sharing some work around the Business Disability Forum as well. So we'd like you to come back together in this room to start rotating round at 3:15. They are power sessions, they're 15 minutes each. It's basically about 7 to 8 minutes of essentially sharing information and then really giving opportunity to interact and ask any questions that you have as well. We'll rotate round, and then essentially we've got some more drinks and opportunity to kind of network at the end. I know it's been quite a long day for those of you that have been with us in person as well, so please grab some food, have some kind of time out now, and then obviously work round as well. But a huge thank you to every single one of you for your support of us here at Dial Global. We really do appreciate it. Thank you.